Hello, everyone. It is time to start our seminar. So welcome to seminar number 6 of the standardized program titled An Example of Functional Food Product FOSHU-Approved Fibersol-27. Last week, we talked about FOSHU, the Functional Food Regulation System in Japan. And today we will discuss an example of functional food product, which name is Fibersol-27. And it is currently approved and regulated by Japan's FOSHU system. So we choose Fibersol-27 because it is particularly excellent functional food product. It is approved for multiple functions by FOSHU. There are many studies about those approved functions and many more studies about potential functional functions that can be approved for. In short, there is a lot of information available for evaluating Fibersol-27, and it is widely available in Japan. So in this seminar, you will learn about Fibersol-27 as one of the best examples, its health functions, and its uses as a functional food product. This seminar is based on a published article in our journal, Bioactive Compound in Health and Disease, by Stella Chen and me. And the article was titled A Product Review of FOSHU-Approved Fibersol-27 and its potential health benefit. Stella is our presenter for today, and she is also a former intern with Functional Food Center from UC Berkeley, and she is now Functional Food Center employee. Before we begin, I would like to remind you that our seminars are absolutely free for you, but those who would like to become certified functional food scientist or functional food professional, they should make a payment for the course to be able to get access to all course materials, including all chapters, PowerPoint presentations, and access to exams. So now I will turn over this presentation to Stella. Stella, please share your screen and start presentation.
I'll be making a presentation, then we'll have a bit of time for questions, and then I'll share the poll where you guys can try out some of our quiz questions based on the presentation and then go over answers at the end. So let me share my screen. All right, so last week we talked about FOSHU, which is the Functional Food Regulation System in Japan. So today I'm going to be zooming in on this system and presenting an example of a functional food product that has been approved under FOSHU. So this product is called Fibersol-27. And this project was advised by Dr. Martirosyan. And if any of you would like to read a little bit more about this topic after today's seminar, you can head to our journal website. There's a published article called A Product Review of FOSHU-Approved Fibersol-27 and its Potential Health Benefits. So that's where you can read about this a little bit more if you'd like. So an outline of how today's presentation is going to go. So first I'll go through a short introduction, and then there are a series of papers that I'd like to present on the various health benefits of Fibersol-27. Some of these are already officially approved under the FOSHU system, while other health benefits have yet to be approved. So these health benefits include glucose control, intestinal benefits, satiety, and also some maximum dosage studies. And then at the end, I'll go through conclusions. So as a bit of review, first of all, FOSHU stands for Food for Specified Health Uses. This is part of Japan's Ministry of Health, Labor, and Welfare. And FOSHU refers to foods that contain ingredients with health functions or with officially proven physiological effects on the body. And to be able to sell a food as a FOSHU-approved product, there needs to be rigorous assessment of the efficacy and safety of the food, and final approval by the ministry is required. So it's quite a rigorous process for a product to be approved under the FOSHU system. And Fibersol-2 itself contains the bioactive compound resistant maltodextrin. This is a standardized FOSHU ingredient. And the product is manufactured by Matsutani Chemical Industries. And in the studies that we'll look at, Fibersol-2 is referred to by several different names, but they all basically mean the same thing. So it can be referred to as resistant maltodextrin, or RMD for short. Also, non-digestible dextrin and indigestible dextrin are some other names for Fibersol-2. And the current functions and dosages that it is approved as is 3 to 8 grams if you want to use Fibersol-2 as a dietary fiber, and then 4 to 6 grams if you'd like to use it to control blood glucose. Then Fibersol-2 is also approved for controlling postprandial triglyceride levels, but there are currently no dosage recommendations for that just yet. Now, as a fun fact, Fibersol-2 is also FDA approved as a dietary fiber. And then the product itself is sold as a powder or a liquid. This is non-viscous, palatable, and water-soluble, which means that you can add Fibersol-2 to a wide variety of food and drinks without changing its taste or its texture. So it's something that's potentially pretty easy and accessible for people to use. All right, so the first function to talk about is Fibersol-2 and its role in controlling glucose levels. So in this first study done in 2009, this was a meta-analysis that looked at 37 randomized controlled trials. This includes both English and foreign publications. And among these 37 trials, anywhere between 3 to 10 grams of Fibersol-2 were added to different carbohydrate food and drinks. And these trials were looking at whether Fibersol-2 could attenuate the glycemic response. So skipping ahead to this slide, this is a table that shows a summary of the results from these 37 trials, and the dosage of Fibersol-2 was adjusted to 6 grams among all these studies. So in the first column, we can see the type of drink or food that Fibersol-2 was added to, such as oolong or green tea or rice. Then in the second column, you can see the number of randomized control trials or RCTs that were done for each type of food and drink. The third column, you can see the total number of participants in each study arm. And then the fourth column shows the percent of the control glycemic response, including an average and a 95% confidence interval. So as we can see here, all of the numbers in this fourth column are negative, meaning that there was a negative attenuation of the glycemic response. Or in other words, the people who are consuming food and drink of Fibersol-2, their glucose levels are not spiking as much anymore. So overall, from these results, the researchers found a combined mean attenuation of the glycemic response by 18%, and that this attenuation was generally stronger when Fibersol-2 was added to drinks compared to when it was added to solid foods. So therefore, 3 to 10 grams of Fibersol-2 per meal has an attenuating effect on the glycemic response to carbohydrate foods and is most effective when Fibersol-2 is added to drinks. Then in a second study about glucose control, 30 subjects with metabolic syndrome were recruited. 15 of them received a Fibersol-2 drink, while the other 15 received a placebo. So the Fibersol-2 drink itself is 9 grams of Fibersol-2 that was added to 280 mils of an unsweetened tea drink. So subjects were to drink 3 cups of this assigned drink a day after each meal for 12 weeks. And then a couple of parameters were measured, including fasting blood glucose levels, fasting insulin levels, and HOMA-R, which is an index that they use for measuring insulin resistance. And these parameters are measured at baseline, week 4, 8, and 12. So the results showed that for the RMD group, which is also the Fibersol-2 group, they experienced a significant decrease in fasting glucose levels during weeks 8 and 12 of the study compared to their fasting glucose levels at baseline. And then while fasting insulin levels did drop for the RMD group, this drop is not significant compared to baseline. And then as for the HOMA-R score, this score significantly decreased. So insulin resistance decreased in the RMD group during week 8 and 12 compared to baseline. And then for this slide, this shows a summary of the results from this study. So first column, there's fasting blood glucose, fasting insulin, a HOMA-R for the RMD and placebo group. And then you can see these were taken at baseline, week 4, 8, and 12. And the reason why I'm showing these numbers is because it is interesting to note here that between week 8 and week 12, the measurements for these parameters either stayed constant or rebounded slightly to previously higher levels for the RMD group. So for example, for fasting blood glucose, for the RMD group, you can see the first row that their baseline blood glucose levels were at 5.44 millimoles per liter, and that by week 8, this had dropped down significantly to 5.15. But in week 12, we can see that these glucose numbers had slightly rebounded back up to 5.18. And as for the HOMA-R score, the RMD group started at a 2.1. And by week 8, it had dropped down significantly to 1.6, but it stayed constant after that. So these show that Fibersol-2's maximum efficacy may be seen starting from week 8, and that even if subjects were to continue taking Fibersol-2 beyond the week 8 mark, they're not going to be seeing much progress after that. Of course, there needs to be larger and longer studies done to be able to confirm this, but this is just like an inference that we can make from these initial results. And then there were some other parameters that the researchers did look at besides these three. So researchers also looked at metabolic syndrome risk factors in the subjects. And they saw that for the RMD group, risk factors for metabolic syndrome decreased to 20, down from 32. And for 2 of the subjects in that group, this resulted in them having no risk factors for metabolic syndrome by the end of the study. And metabolic syndrome risk factors also did decrease for the placebo group to 25, down from 32. The drop is not as big as the RMD group, but nevertheless, it still did drop. And this may be because the interviews and the assessments that came from participating in this study may have led to some lifestyle changes, even among the placebo group. So this study does offer some potential new functions that Fibersol-2 can be approved for. So currently, Fibersol-2 is only approved for controlling glucose levels. So it hasn't been implicated yet, or officially implicated yet, in managing insulin levels, insulin resistance, or metabolic syndrome. So if more data can be collected about Fibersol-2's effects on these parameters, Fibersol-2 can potentially be approved for these functions one day. Okay, so now for the next function, we'll be talking about Fibersol-2 and intestinal benefits. So in this study, 66 healthy adult volunteers between the ages of 18 to 30 were recruited. And the subjects had no daily defecation habits, and they were in this study for a total of 21 days. So 33 subjects received 15 grams of Fibersol-2, while the other 33 received a placebo. And this Fibersol-2 was administered in a powder form, and it was dissolved in water. And subjects would consume this drink once a day after breakfast. And then different intestinal parameters were measured, which we will go through. So first of all, colonic transit time was measured. So colonic transit time was measured at different parts of the colon, including the total colon, and then right, left, and rectosigmoidal colon. This was taken for the RMD, or the Fibersol-2 group, and the placebo group. It was taken at baseline and week 3. So overall, there is a significant decrease in total left and rectosigmoidal colon transit time compared to baseline transit times in the RMD group, while the placebo group did not experience any significant changes in their colon transit time. Then the researchers also looked at stool volume and stool consistency. These 2 parameters were self-measured and assessed by the subjects, and it was taken at baseline and then 3 more times at week 1, 2, and 3. So the researchers found that there is a significant increase in the RMD group for stool volume over the 3 weeks compared to baseline, and that the RMD group also experienced better stool consistency scores. In particular, stool consistency score increased by average of 21.4% in this group compared to baseline. And then the placebo group experienced no significant changes in stool volume or consistency. In addition to these, some other clinical intestinal benefits were also observed. For example, significantly less RMD subjects compared to baseline reported sensations of straining during defecation. So at the beginning of the study, around 63.6% of the subjects in the RMD group experienced sensations of straining, but this was down to 33.3% in that group by the end of the study. And then also significantly less RMD subjects compared to baseline reported sensations of incomplete evacuation, from 51.5 down to 27.3%. So similar to the last study, this particular Fibersol-2 study also offers some additional benefits that Fibersol-2 may have. So currently, as for intestinal health, Fibersol-2 is only approved for improving intestinal regularity. But there are some other functions that could potentially help with that we can see here, such as reducing the sensations of straining, incomplete evacuation, or improving stool volume. But the study does come with some limitations. First of all, it is a relatively short and small study, especially compared to the last glucose control study that we looked at that lasted for 12 weeks. This study should have gone on for at least 12 weeks as well, not only so we have more time to gather data, but also so we can match up study timelines and compare results. And this is just a common theme among Fibersol-2 studies and a lot of other functional food studies as well, that currently a lot of studies tend to follow their own timelines and dosages. And there needs to be a more coordinated effort on matching these timelines and dosages so that clear, effective, and safe guidelines can be shared to the public about how best and how safely to use these products. And another thing about this study is that the parameters like stool volume and stool consistency were self-reported by the subjects. So these parameters may have been subject to some inaccuracies or bias. But nevertheless, if more studies can be done that studies Fibersol-2 and its effects on different intestinal parameters, then there seems to be some potential new functions that can also be added to the FOSHU guidelines. Okay, so next we'll be looking at Fibersol-2 and satiety. So here 19 healthy adult subjects were recruited, and they received either 0, 5, or 10 grams of Fibersol-2 in 250 milliliters of peach flavored Nestea. And then with this tea, they also ate a standard meal for 15 minutes. And then afterwards, subjective appetite measures and levels of appetite regulating hormones were taken. So first, for subjective satiety, these measures were taken up to 4 hours post-meal, and the subjects were asked how satisfied they felt after eating and how much can they still eat after their meal. And the researchers found that the 10-gram Fibersol-2 group, which is the highest dosage group, showed significantly higher satiety and decreased hunger compared to the other two groups, starting 1.5 hours post-meal. So subjective satiety improved. Then as for the satiety-related hormones, the scientists looked at peptide YY or PYY. This is a hormone that increases with satiety. And then they also looked at glucagon-like peptide 1, GLP-1. And this is a hormone that promotes insulin release in response to glucose and also tends to increase with satiety. So there is a significant increase in both PYY and GLP-1 levels in the 10-gram Fibersol-2 group compared to the other two groups. And the increase in these hormone levels was most pronounced up to 3 hours post-meal. And they took these measures up to 4 hours post-meal. So Fibersol-2 is not currently approved for satiety functions. So definitely if more and larger studies are done about this in the future, satiety is also another function that can potentially be added on to the list of functions that Fibersol-2 can be used for. Then finally is the maximum dosage study. So this is super important to be done to make sure that people are able to use this product in a safe manner. So here, 10 healthy male and female subjects were recruited, and they were given gradually increasing doses of Fibersol-2 to see where the upper limit is at, where they will start experiencing diarrhea or other gastrointestinal side effects. So the lowest dose started as 0.7 grams per kilogram of body weight, and then the dosage increased by 0.1 grams from there. So at the highest dose level of 1.1 grams per kilogram of body weight, one male subject experienced diarrhea 2 hours post-ingestion. So the study was stopped at this 1.1 cap. So it was concluded that for males, the maximum dose is 1.0 grams of Fibersol-2 per kilogram of body weight. And then for females, for now, it was capped at more than 1.1 grams because since the study was stopped there and none of the female subjects had experienced side effects by then, it is still not clear what exactly the upper limit is for females. So there would need to be further studies on that. All right, and then this shows a summary slide of the different benefits that Fibersol-2 potentially has and the dosages that it needs to be used in to be able to observe these effects. So for glucose control, the meta-analysis showed that 3 to 10 grams of Fibersol-2 per day can attenuate the glycemic response, while 9 grams of Fibersol-2 per meal in that second study can moderate fasting glucose, which is already a FOSHU-approved function, but it can also moderate fasting insulin levels and decrease insulin resistance, and also improve other metabolic syndrome risk factors. Then for intestinal benefits, the study we looked at showed that 15 grams of Fibersol-2 per day can reduce colon transit time, improve stool volume and consistency, and has some clinical intestinal functions. So this adds potentially more detail and more functions than the currently approved function of improving intestinal regularity. And then Fibersol-2 also has been linked with improving satiety. So at least 10 grams of that is required to be able to improve your satiety. And then maximum dose is set at 1 gram of Fibersol-2 per kilogram of body weight for males, and then more than 1.1 grams for females. So conclusions that we can draw from this. So first of all, I think one thing to mention is that the dosages that we looked at in these papers tend to be higher than FOSHU recommendations. So coming back here, as you may recall, Fibersol-2 is currently approved for 3 to 8 grams if you want to use it for glucose control, and then 4 to 6 grams for intestinal regularity. So you can see that a lot of these numbers in these studies are slightly higher than what is currently recommended for under FOSHU. And this may be because when FOSHU was considering Fibersol-2 for approval, they referenced many more papers than the ones that we looked at today, including studies that were available only in the Japanese language. So maybe the average among these studies tended to be lower. And there is also a chance that FOSHU is just setting lower and more conservative requirements when it comes to dosages. Then among these studies, there was also a general lack of coordination in terms of dosing and timing, which does make the results among these studies a little bit hard to compare. Most of these studies, with the exception of the first meta-analysis, also did use small sample sizes. And finally, a lot of them also seem to test pretty arbitrary dosages. Like for example, for the intestinal study, that one only tested 15 grams of Fibersol-2, but they didn't try testing other dosages to see how that would affect the results. So besides that, there is also a lack of aftermarket research and epidemiological studies on Fibersol-2. And a reason for that can be because the FOSHU system does not require these kinds of studies to be done before or after approval. But these kinds of studies are still important because right now we don't have too much hard information on how Fibersol-2 functions in uncontrolled consumption settings. And we also don't have much information on how they may affect different parts of the population. So definitely looking forward into the future, there needs to be more coordination of studies for dosing and timing of these Fibersol-2 studies, and then also more aftermarket research, epidemiological studies, so we can see how this product plays out in a large and diverse population. And then just to add on, even though Fibersol-2 is only approved as a functional food under the Japanese FOSHU system, Fibersol-2 is still accessible in outside of Japan. So it's actually sold in the US as well. The Matsutani Chemical Industries does have a partnership with a US company called the Archer Daniels Midland Company. So it does seem that they're trying to reach wider populations. And this is useful for the US and other Western countries as well, because our diets in these places tend to be low in fiber, and Fibersol-2 is a dietary fiber. And then obesity, diabetes, other metabolic and chronic conditions are on the rise. And Fibersol-2 has been suggested in these studies to increase satiety, to improve glucose control, and to improve metabolic syndrome, which can help with a lot of these conditions. So overall, we do need more information on Fibersol-2. And if we can get this information, this will make it more available and accessible for the public, and hopefully be able to improve health status and outcomes for a lot of people all over the world. And then just as a last slide, this shows some pictures of what Fibersol-2 looks like when it's sold in the US. So because we don't have a formal functional food regulation system here, Fibersol-2 is sold in many different forms. You can see here that there's different packaging and different names. And this may be confusing for a lot of consumers because these look like 3 different products, but they're really essentially very similar, the same vein. So this really shows the importance of having a formal functional food regulation system so that we can uniformly and reliably market Fibersol-2 to the public and show them how to use it effectively and safely. And while I don't have a picture of what Fibersol-2 looks like in Japan, at least in Japan, since it is a FOSHU-approved product, it needs to be sold with a FOSHU logo. So consumers will be able to identify Fibersol-2 with that logo. And FOSHU also has some other requirements about what information to include about Fibersol-2 on the product. So consumers will also be able to find more information about how to use Fibersol-2 safely and effectively on their product labels. Yeah, so these are the papers and some of the sources that I referenced for this presentation. Then, yeah, so now we have some time for questions. I do see that there's some questions in the chat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
First question is that, is this more into prebiotic since it contains resistant starch?
Yeah, so since it contains resistant starch, it can be used as a prebiotic, but this is currently not a formally approved function under FOSHU, but it is something that can definitely be approved if just more studies are done about this and if it's submitted to FOSHU for additional consideration. But yeah, this is something that Fibersol-2 can potentially be used for. And then as for allergic reactions, so at least among the English studies that I've seen, there were no studies that studied allergic reactions, and under the FOSHU recommendations, there was also no mention of allergic reactions. But mainly the side effects that people reported when they're taking Fibersol-2 is from that maximum dosage that I showed. So symptoms like diarrhea, and also a couple of other participants experienced a little bit of bloating when they took Fibersol-2. So that is currently the extent to what we know about the side effects of Fibersol-2. So definitely some more studies can be done about that. Then,
There's one more.
Yes.
What is the source of Fibersol-2?
Yeah, so Fibersol-2, its bioactive compound is digestion-resistant maltodextrin. So this is derived from cornstarch.
Okay, very good. Okay, so here's one. Is there a relationship between the retention time and satiety?
Okay. Actually, Sammy, can you clarify what you what exactly you mean by retention time? Oh, colon retention time. Yeah, so that one, I'm not sure if there's a relationship between colon retention time and satiety. So for the satiety study, the components of satiety they looked at were just the subjective satiety measures and then those hormone levels such as PYY and GLP-1. So that study did not link these two variables, colon retention time and satiety, together. But that can be something to be examined in the future. Yeah.
Okay, great. Someone saying thank you. So she have a meeting, so we can, this is recorded, so later on we can send our recording to anyone who would like to have, and especially those who are gonna have participate in an exam and to become functional food professional. So if anyone else have a question or comment, if not, I would like myself make a couple points that it is extremely important to bring to your attention that number one, we can see that one bioactive compound can be used in different cases. So in one case, Fibersol-2 different amount was used for the control of glucose, another one for intestinal benefits, and also third for satiety. So this is very interesting. So one bioactive compound can be used for very different cases, and by using different amount. Then second point is, as Stella mentioned, so in the case of glucose control, so we saw that after 8 weeks, so there's not more progress in improvement, and even more we can see that slightly becoming a smaller benefit than it was before 8 and 4 or 6 weeks. So that's that is speaks a lot himself because as we always mentioning that functional food center recommending having 90 to 120 days experiments, clinical trials. So because most changes in body in blood cells, especially taking a place up to 120 days. So we have to try. We know that it's really difficult to have a long-time clinical trials, but at the end, this product gonna be used for years for many people. So it's much better if we are able to have experiments at least up to 90 and 120 days, so we know what's happening. So, and in another case related to the intestinal benefits, I saw that it was even much less time, about 1 month. So this is meaning that even we are thinking that Japanese system is excellent and government control, but I would say we should do much. And last hour, in a couple articles that we published, so we speaking about 2 additional steps that we have to go to, and one of them is aftermarket studies. So when people taking these products in not controlled environment, please understand it's very different when we have people in clinics and controlled environment, and we know those people having only certain might be side and other diseases and kind of some stuff that we can control. But when it's uncontrolled environment, someone taking this stuff at home, you don't know how many disease person have. So this is needed much more investigation. So manufacturers have to do aftermarket study. So see what's happened when people using this, let's say within 1 year, and then doing some adjustment, maybe with dosage, maybe with the time they can consume. Yeah, that was probably most important stuff I was trying to bring to your attention. So I think we have some other stuff to do, Stella. Is it right? So we have some questionnaire.
Yeah,
So let's go with that, please.
okay. Yeah, so next I'll be releasing a poll. There's 10 questions. So if you are in our standardized program, you'll need to know this for the quizzes and exams. But otherwise, feel free to try out the questions to apply what you just learned. So I'll release the poll for 5 minutes, and then at the end of 5 minutes, we'll come back and go over answers. All right, so it has been 5 minutes. So I will close the poll now and share the results. Okay, so for number 1, there were multiple correct answers for this. What are the current FOSHU-approved functions of Fibersol-2? So answer to this is controlling postprandial triglyceride levels. That is approved under FOSHU, but there are no current dosage recommendations for that one. Then it's also approved for controlling postprandial glucose levels. That's for 3 to 8 grams of Fibersol-2 is for controlling glucose levels. And then for improving intestinal regularity, it's approved under the dosage recommendations of 4 to 6 grams. So I know we talked about increasing satiety, but this is actually not a FOSHU-approved function just yet. And then Fibersol-2 has not been associated with or approved for improving mineral absorption. So the answer to this is B, D, and E. Then number 2, what is the bioactive compound in Fibersol-2? The answer to this is digestion-resistant maltodextrin, and then the main food source for that is mainly from cornstarch. Okay, then for this question, in Hashizumi et al. Study about Fibersol-2's benefits for metabolic syndrome patients, the answer is fasting insulin levels was the only parameter that did not change significantly for the RMD group. And then the parameters also stayed constant or rebounded to slightly higher levels between weeks 8 to 12 for the RMD group. So the answer to this is B. Then for number 4, Ruiz et al. Study on Fibersol-2's intestinal benefits show that Fibersol-2 had the following benefits on intestinal function. So as you may probably remember, in the RMD group, there were a couple of clinical intestinal benefits. So the RMD subjects reported less straining sensation during defecation. The stool consistency score also did improve by 21.4% in the RMD group compared to baseline. As for colon transit time actually decreased for the Fibersol-2 group. And for the stool volume, it actually increased. So C and D is actually the opposite. And then finally, E is also correct. So RMD subjects experienced a decreased sensation of incomplete evacuation. So the answer to this is A, B, and E. Then for number 5, what does PYY or peptide YY do? So this is the hormone that was measured in the satiety study, and peptide YY is a hormone that increases satiety. The number 6, what does GLP-1 or glucagon-like peptide do? GLP-1 promotes insulin release in response to glucose, and its levels do tend to increase as you become more full. Then what is the maximum dose of Fibersol-2 as determined by Kishimoto in 2013? The answer to this is C, 1 gram per kilogram body weight for males, and then more than 1.1 gram per kilogram body weight for females. The number 8, what are some conditions that Fibersol-2 can potentially help manage or prevent? Choose all that apply. The answer to this is B, metabolic syndrome. So in that glucose control study, we saw that metabolic syndrome risk factors decreased for a lot of the participants who received Fibersol-2. Fibersol-2 can potentially also help with type 2 diabetes mellitus because it controls for postprandial glucose levels, and it can also potentially control for insulin levels and insulin resistance. And if Fibersol-2 really is associated with improving satiety, it can also help manage obesity. So B, C, and E are the answers. And number 9, the dosage amounts recommended by the scientific papers in this article tend to be higher than the current FOSHU recommendations. The answer to this is A. And then finally, what are some characteristics that future studies need to include in order for Fibersol-2 to be used more widely as a functional food? So the answer is actually all of the above. So we need to see more studies with larger sample sizes. It's also important to do epidemiological studies and aftermarket research. Then a wider range of doses in general do need to be tested among these studies to make sure that the effects don't change, or to find the most effective dose for the function that you're studying. Longer time periods also need to be done, and then more consistent dosage ranges and time periods for a given function need to be done among studies, so that results can be compared and clear and more comprehensive guidelines for using Fibersol-2 can be developed. So are there any questions about any of these?
Okay, so what no questions? No, actually, I can't see. Yeah. No, nothing in chat.
Okay. All right, so thank you everyone for coming. If you have any questions about anything that we talked about today in the seminar or about our standardized program, feel free to email us. And next week, we will be having another seminar. So next week's seminar is actually on Thursday, not Wednesday, but it's also 9:30 to 10:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And we will be having another live lecture by Hunter, who is one of a Functional Food Center employees, about functional foods and Parkinson's disease.